Well, hello, Bill. How are you?
All things considered, fine, except for reality is collapsing around me.
Well, yes, although today I did wear my Stetson in celebration of the Christy Noem, Thank God and Greyhound She's Gone Day.
Yeah. Oh, she'll be missed.
Oh, yeah, like a big hole in your head.
Like the Black Death.
Yes. Well, I'm going to start us off today, but we will be getting into some other deeper dive into the economy and how it relates to the war, what's going to happen to young people and their employment with AI, and then I promised to come back with some information about how young people are getting their news. It's more depressing than you thought. But I'm going to start with the Ladies Who Fawn on Trump, Part 3. And I've already done my armchair psychoanalysis of Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, and Pam Bondi, who we all know is the head of DOJ. And get your popcorn out, she's been called to Congress again. Now, loyal listeners will recall that the theoretical basis for my armchair psychoanalysis is how we respond to fear. And I've provided an update on the theories of the fight or flight response. It now includes fight, flight, freeze, that's the deer in the headlights response, or appeasement, fawning. And this has to do with a response that becomes chronic or a response that is inseparable from one's personality. The appeasement or fawning response seeks affirmation of one's self-worth. We all do. But this is through proximity with someone one trusts to provide them with affirmation and a sense of security. I may also add to this analysis money, because Pam Bondi got extremely rich once she caved to the right. And I have a feeling the same is going to be true of Bari Weiss. And Susie Wiles, of course, already had made quite a bit from her lobbying firm. So today, I'm turning to Bari Weiss. She's a director of news at CBS. I wouldn't say she fawns on Trump because, unlike Wiles and Bondi, Weiss does not have a personal relationship with Trump. But she does seek affirmation from and owes her job and fortune to Trumpists. And while Susie Wiles and Pam Bondi's fawning response originates from personal insecurities related to their family dynamics as children, and especially their relationships with their fathers. And you can find out more about this by listening to our previous podcasts. Weiss's fears relate to her personal identity as a lesbian and Jewish, both of which she understands, and I will concede this, and not without reason, as making her vulnerable, not only as an outsider, but as a potential target of violence. Now, I'm not going to rehash how Bari Weiss put in charge of CBS News after it was acquired by David Ellison, who was backed by his billionaire father, Larry. Larry is very close to Trump. David Ellison purchased Weiss's online company, the Free Press, for $150 million, which was considerably overvalued.
Yeah.
Now, David Ellison did not hire Weiss because she's an experienced journalist. She's never been a reporter or been employed in any kind of journalism. She specializes in anti-woke, pro-Israel, polarizing narratives, which delight the Ellisons, father and son. A recent example of her disregard for journalistic standards of editorial neutrality was kind of summed up by the Daily Beast, who calls Weiss MAGA curious. She hired an Iranian-American journalist and activist who's very well known and has received many awards, Masih Alinejad, as a commentator. She commentates on human rights issues in Iran, especially as they relate to women. She's been exiled from Iran. She's been named by Time as among the honorees for Women of the Year. So a very respectable person. When the war started, she gave a very angry response, an over-the-top response to a post by Mayor Mondami, who criticized the war as illegal and said Americans did not want another war but wanted the issues of affordability addressed. Now, to explain Ahmadinejad's response, she's been the target of kidnapping and assassination plots coming from Iran. Her response to Mondami was, "Come to one of my safe houses," and said that while Mondami has said his mother is afraid to wear the hijab on the subway, that's nothing compared to being the target of an assassination plot. She put her outrage in a Twitter X response to Mondami's posting. Weiss reposted it with a fire emoji. This upset the CBS journalist because it was an editorial commentary coming from the head of the news division. So, complete violation of journalistic ethics. I mention this example only to point out something I will return to later. It is possible, now you tell me if this is true, Bill, to both oppose another war in the Mideast and oppose the murderous Iranian regime.
Absolutely.
One doesn't cancel out the other. Since she was put in charge, a number of producers, staff, and on-air talent have left voluntarily or been bought out. And more significantly, the editorial control over programming has changed from a decentralized editorial model, which gives autonomy to individual news programs and their senior producers, to a centralized hierarchy where the national editorial direction is set from the top. And this is how Fox News operates. There is messaging coordination across programs and reduced autonomy for individual programs. So that's what she's set up. What makes her tick? In a New Yorker profile by Claire Malone, published in January 19, 2026, we learn that Weiss grew up in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. In her 2019 book, Weiss says it was an urban shtetl. The title of her book is How to Fight Anti-Semitism. In an interview, she said that she attended a Jewish day school in a family that belonged to 3 synagogues. Quote, "It was not unusual for me to read Torah at shul," that would be at the synagogue, "and then to go, say, to a Chabad family for lunch before heading to basketball practice," close quote. Chabad is the most visible international organization for Hasidic Jews, which means it is ultra-Orthodox, fundamentalist, and mystical. They are pro-Israel, but especially pro-IDF. Her family spent several summers in Israel. Both her parents worked in the family furniture store. Her father, Lou, in his youth, was a McGovern Democrat who became a conservative, who espoused free markets and was pro-Israel. Her mother, Amy, called herself, quote, "a very moderate liberal Democrat," close quote. Now, this is the most interesting fact. Amy threatened a Lysistrata-style sex strike in 2016 if her husband voted for Trump. He said he wrote in his wife's name instead. Now, this is exemplary of the argumentative extremes which were evidently typical of the Weiss household. At Shabbat, that is Friday night dinners, there were always guests and always debates, often contentious. Weiss's sister Casey said, quote, "sometimes it got really heated." Now, in my opinion, it was the attack on the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018 that became the galvanizing trauma underlining Weiss's embrace, if not of the Trumpist right, then of the Trump-friendly Ellison family's right-wing orientation. Weiss became a bat mitzvah in March of 1997 at the Tree of Life Synagogue. The 2018 attack was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history, killing 11 congregants. She was not there when it happened, and in fact, her family regularly attended another synagogue, but she wrote a powerful account in a report for the New York Times. Quote, when an anti-Semitic murderer mows down Jews in the synagogue where you became a bat mitzvah, you might find yourself in the sanctuary again, but instead of family and friends, the sanctuary is host to a crew of volunteers, the Chevra Kadisha, who will spend the week cleaning up every drop of blood, because according to Jewish tradition, each part of the body must be sanctified in death and so buried, close quote. I think that's her central trauma. Mm-hmm. A related one is at Columbia University, where she majored in history. She was drawn into the protests against professors in Middle Eastern studies who were accused of anti-Semitism. She started a magazine about Jewish issues, which was externally funded, and began developing a considerable network of contacts that she built upon after graduation. Okay, so that's a quick overview of her biography. This is what makes her tick. For a time, she dated Kate McKinnon, who, as you probably know, is a Saturday Night Live star.
Yeah.
And McKinnon said of her whole thing in college was, I'm gay and I'm pro-Israel, good luck classifying me. If you've got an issue with me, take your shot. You've never seen the likes of me. I'm so unpredictable, so heterodox, close quote. Well, that's a pretty defensive claim. This defensive self-identification is a tagline for Weiss. She continues to use it to this day. And I think it provides a basis for understanding how she uses it to protect herself by fawning or seeking to appease potential threats. John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, 4 months ago, profiled Bari Weiss. And one of the clips is this. Bari Weiss was speaking at the Conservative Federalist Society. Quote, I am a gay woman who is moderately pro-choice. I know there are people in this room who believe that my marriage should not have been legal, and that's okay because we're all Americans who want lower taxes, close quote.
Oh, my God.
I call that fawning.
It's also ridiculous.
Yes, it is. And I also don't know what it means to be moderately pro-choice. Her online platform, The Free Press, purports to be a news-gathering organization, but it isn't. It seems to be about finding controversial stories online, giving a cursory fact check on Google, claiming the base story is the kind mainstream journalists won't cover because they fear punishment, distorting the information and framing the information to favor right-wing and or Israeli interests. On August 17th, for example, 2025, the Free Press ran a story intended to discredit reports of starvation in Gaza. Try not to have a hernia while I'm telling you all this.
I know. I mean, where does reality drop by?
This is what I'm about to explore. Israel produced quite a few propaganda reports to refute the notion that they were starving people in Gaza. So the Free Press headlined a story. The headline was, they became symbols for Gazan starvation, but all 12 suffer from other health problems. The Free Press offered up to viewers an example of hard-hitting journalism by their intrepid reporter, Olivia Reingold, who spent more time on her hair, makeup, and office casual open-button blouse than she did sitting in front of her computer. This is how the news is gathered at the Free Press, from Googling. It's true. The story that she offered was that she found evidence that that is 12 of the 14 pictures of children identified in the mainstream press as starving were actually suffering from disease or injury. This was used as evidence against those who claimed that Israel wanted children to die. The reality was, first of all, that at least one of the children with a pre-existing condition had a head wound from Israeli shelling. One child was suffering for a lack of the food needed to counteract her pre-existing condition. She needed special food just to stay alive. And second, as Jerry Knickdick reported in the New York Times, the evidence of a pre-existing illness in a child is, quote, not a rebuttal of famine. It is a feature of how famine kills and who it hits first, close quote. Now, I chose this story to further illustrate how Bari Weiss weaponizes polarization in the name of seeking the truth. She exploits, or does not understand herself, the difference between contradictory and contrary statements. And I must say that in this report, nefarious decontextualization was also occurring. That is, there was the account of the father about his daughter who needed nutrition because she has this pre-existing condition, and they lifted out of it just the statement that she had this pre-existing condition, and not the statements from the father that she was starving because they couldn't get the food. So there's distortion that's intentional. I need to say that before I go on. But here's the logical problem. Two universal statements are contrary if they cannot both be true and cannot both be false. That is, one of them has to be true, as in, there is famine in Gaza, or there is no famine in Gaza. Both can't be true. One must be false. This is where evidence is needed. Logic alone will not provide the answer. If you're going to say there is famine in Gaza, then bring forward the evidence. Two statements are contradictory. For example, if you say all children are starving in Gaza and some children in Gaza are not starving. They cannot both be true, but they can both be false. The problem with the free press story is that it presumes that a contradictory statement makes the opposite statement false. In other words, the free press story argues that because some of the children depicted as starving have pre-existing conditions, then it cannot be true that either those children or any children are starving in Gaza. The key to this obfuscation is that the opposing statements are elevated to universals. Either all children are starving or no children are starving. The ability to polarize an issue resides in this tactic. Elevating a dispute over fact to two universal statements and making it seem as if one and only one contending position must be true. This is one of the reasons that Bari Weiss uses her outsider identity to position herself as truth-seeking by offering debates or contrarian positions about issues. It is also why she is a serpent in the apple tree of journalism. From my armchair, I think the polarization of issues in order to promote a right-wing position derives from the approval of authoritarianism because of a fear for personal safety due to an ethnic identity. And I would add a gender identity that authoritarians disapprove of. Mm-hmm. An ethnic identity based, and by the way, for the rest of what I'm saying, actual psychologists say it too.
Not somebody who plays one on TV.
No, that's me. I play one on podcasts. An ethnic identity-based safety fear arises from perceived vulnerability to discrimination, violence, or exclusion because of one's ethnic and/or gender identity. Perceived group-based threat is the key to one's attitude toward authoritarianism, because the fear can lead to a desire for strong leadership, and this is key to accepting civil liberty trade-offs. I'll say more about those trade-offs in a moment. Among the other characteristics, this fear, because of ethnic or gender identity, increases discomfort with ambiguity.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
The desire for simplified narratives, stronger group identification, strong defense of cultural worldviews, favoring leaders who project strength, and favoring hierarchy to assure order. And of course, she's imposed a rather rigid hierarchy on CBS News. Said another way, bending the knee to authoritarianism is a quest for safety because of a perceived threat to oneself as a member of a targeted group. As for accepting civil liberty trade-offs as a characteristic of fear-based group identity, I want to return to the 2016 election of Donald Trump. At that time, Bari Weiss agreed with her mother, Amy, who you will recall threatened to cut her husband off from any sex if he voted for Trump. Bari Weiss cried when she heard that Trump had won. At the time of the election, she wrote an article warning about one of Trump's key supporters, Steve Bannon. Quote, he is proud to have provided the bullhorn for a movement that unabashedly promotes white nationalism, racism, misogyny, and the relentless identification of Jews as the champions of the country's most nefarious forces, close quote. In the Wall Street Journal, she published a column about the anti-Trump protests in New York City at the time of Trump's inauguration. Quote, the thousands of men, women, and children weren't by and large professional protesters. That was an accusation from Trump. They were Americans who showed up because they felt the fundamental values of the nation they love were being violated, close quote. But by 2025, she changed her tune. Or she'd sold out. And I mean that literally.
Yeah, it kind of seems like she might have become a professional protester.
Yeah, she did.
Does that pay well?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just told you how
I mean, for left-wing professional protesters.
I'll be talking about how you monetize that a little bit later. You'll be interested as an economist. In a Fox interview, Weiss said that she was, at the time that she was against Trump, that she was a sufferer of what conservatives at the time would have called TDS, that is Trump derangement syndrome, though she added that her concerns that Trump would, quote, coarsen our public discourse, close quote, had been correct. Okay, so here's where the trade-offs with civil liberties come. As with her father, Weiss changed course because she liked Trump's policies in the Middle East, along with the booming economy. Quote, am I still worried about his character? She asked the Fox News interviewer rhetorically. Am I worried about things like January 6th? Yes, but I would say the sign of an open mind and the sign of a thinking person is a person that's able to take on new information and adjust our priors, close quote.
She's not talking about an open mind. She's talking about a vacuous mind.
Yeah, exactly. Between 2016 and 2025, Weiss was at the heart of the outbreak of protests against pro-Palestinian professors at Columbia. Most significantly, she reported on the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. Both experiences instilled in her an understandable existential fear, a fear of being targeted because of her identity, and as a predictable consequence, she has moved towards authoritarianism and is being well paid for it.
You know, there's an element of this story that you can obviously identify with, and one wonders how it becomes so incredibly toxic, or how it changes the person into something that is actually what they're afraid of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, and this kind of binary thinking about things. I mean, the two statements made about starving and Gaza, they're both true. You know, I mean, children were starving in Gaza. Children who are starving, some of them have these problems. That's why they die first.
That's why they're going to die first, yeah.
Right. And yet that kind of simple recognition that these are not contradictory statements, in fact, they're both true, or both partially true, didn't seem to even be considered.
No, and as I say, in fact, the actual testimony of the father of one of those children was distorted.
Yeah, but one wonders, you can't make that mistake unintentionally.
Oh, no, 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 no.
This is a strategy. It's not a misunderstanding. And then you have to ask yourself, we're looking at the psychological motivations, but I'm an economist.
Okay.
There's money to be made here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in fact, the position she's in now is extraordinarily lucrative. So
Yes, it is. And yet, in addition to it being lucrative, it's distorting the news of a major broadcast network
yeah,
and driving real journalists away.
yep. Which is inevitable with her placement.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
I have mentioned I have a friend who left.
Yeah.
That was a loss for CBS and
Well,
all of us.
yeah, and so was Anderson Cooper, too. Well, now let's go to some more exciting, depressing things.
The economy.
How about the job reports?
Oh, God. You know I've been pessimistic about this.
Yes, you have been.
Everything I've said prior to this was optimistic.
No. No, really?
The February revised employment numbers are catastrophic. The Labor Department released figures showing that 92,000 jobs were lost in February, and the unemployment rate increased to 4.4%. This is catastrophic because the anemic job growth in previous months no longer appears to be a blip, but confirms a downward trend.
Did you say 4%?
4.4% from 4.2
Wow.
in 1 month.
Okay.
The revision is so large because the Bureau of Labor Statistics remains understaffed and has struggled to process the surveys as they come in. This slows down the process of obtaining the data needed for accurate counting. As we talked about last week, last month's preliminary figures were promising, as we mentioned, estimating a 130,000 job increase. However, as I noted, the range of expected revisions with a 90% confidence interval was from up 5,000 jobs to up 150,000 jobs, with 130,000 jobs as the central tendency. So the revisions fall outside this range.
Oh.
Right? 100,000 off in the negative direction. So this means a lot with regard to the economy. Unemployment's doing bad, but at the same time, prices are going up. President School Killer's starting of World War III has also had a dramatic impact on prices at the same time. Soaring international oil prices due to the involvement of 17 Middle Eastern countries in our war efforts have shaken global confidence. Iran's closing of the Straits of Hormuz has halted the flow of oil to many regions, and oil prices are expected to reach $100 a barrel soon.
Oh, goodness. But it's already going up at the pump.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but
Okay.
Trump has said that, he's going to break the blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, and Iran's laughing. From the medieval period, the foundation of states was pointing cannons at boats going through narrow areas. The coal, when it was attacked in Lebanon, with a speedboat, right? These are oil tankers. They don't move fast. They're hard to miss. And they're full of flammable liquid. This is just a ridiculous proposition that they can do this.
Well, the other part of the proposition is, the issue is insurance.
That's one of them.
And Lloyd's is not interested in insuring these tankers.
Yeah.
That's why they're all tied up and won't go through.
Well, yeah, there are other issues too, like when they go through, what's on the other side, Trump's comments that they would do this are beyond stupid, just from an operational standpoint. Now, all of this, oddly enough, should not really affect the U.S. because we're an oil exporter.
Right.
Not only do we export our oil, we're exporting Venezuela's right now. We produce enough oil for domestic consumption, and our oil prices don't need to change. Still, both oil companies and retailers have already begun their price gouging and profiteering
Absolutely.
with gas prices at local stations. And I want to point out this is gas made months ago from oil pumped even more months ago and delivered to refineries. These are selling for close to $4 a gallon in Pennsylvania, an oil-producing state. We love irony here at Plato's Cave. Now, of course, this will translate, and already is at the pump, into increased inflation. Not just for our gas, but for everything, because our transportation of goods and services, along with much of the production of goods, still relies on fossil fuels. Well, it's a good thing President Clean Coal destroyed all our advances in green energy production in the United States, so there are no alternatives for U.S. consumers to turn to in this intentionally created new energy crisis. We are an international disgrace and an embarrassment to thoughtful, peaceful people with a sense of justice in the U.S. Shame on us for tolerating this monster. So the overall economy, stagflation, here we come, decreasing employment and increasing inflation, the Fed's worst nightmare. Speaking of the Fed, President Dumpsterfire has formally nominated former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to succeed Jerome Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve. If confirmed by the Senate, Warsh, who is an inflation hawk with experience at the Fed and in the private sector, will begin a 4-year term as chair following the end of Powell's term, but he will be on the board for 12 years.
That's a long time.
All of them are on for 12 years. That's what the appointment is. So 3 things might happen once Warsh is in place based on the current data and his history. He will fight inflation. Trump will be furious. Warsh might show he has no integrity and promote Trump's agenda. Parenthetically, I must add, which seems unlikely, and the rest of the Fed board wouldn't go along with it anyway, right? He's got one
thinking.
vote, yeah. Or alternatively, and this is what I would do, he could sabotage his own appointment and return to lucrative employment in the private sector. I mention this because that would be the wisest strategy for him on a personal basis. So I believe he will go for the first option and be lambasted by Trump for about 3 years, then spend 9 years trying to clean up this mess. Needless to say, and this is the bad part about this, we are about to enter a recession in the technical sense, and the guardrails in place to prevent it from turning into a depression are significantly weakened. Now, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is a statistical organization originally founded at Columbia University, but now at the University of Chicago, it is not a government agency. They define a recession as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy lasting more than a few months, visible in industrial production, employment, real income, and wholesale retail sales. Now, often on the news, it is simplified to 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Okay, but see, the key is that's the shorthand. What this is really about is all of those other components, and they emphasize depth, spread, and duration. So we haven't had 2 quarters of GDP decline.
Yeah.
But we've had, now looking at these employment figures, employment decline for a quarter.
An entire quarter.
An entire quarter. And it's deep. You have something you need to talk about in the third segment. So.
Okay. I did want to talk about voting demographics and news consumption because in our last broadcast I said I would. 38% of Americans aged 18 to 29 regularly obtain news from influencers from social media platforms. Of that 38%, 43% get their news from TikTok.
A news organization of great repute.
Absolutely. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, X formerly known as Twitter, these are all platforms where you get your news from influencers rather than from news gathering organizations or journalists. Very often, short videos are produced as news And then young people share the headlines with their friends. And most are drawn to TikTok and YouTube for short form video. This demographic follows individuals, not institutional news sources. The most popular influencers are commentators, not journalists or reporters. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. The sources for their news are traditional institutions in the network, cable, and print.
Now, you're talking about those platforms, the people there put content from these places.
This is where they derive it. Yeah, that's how the flow goes.
But it's derivative. It's not the actual.
They're commenting on it.
Yeah.
They're not doing any news gathering. But what it means is that the billionaire ownership and the conglomerate ownership of the news that we've been witnessing has a knock-on effect with the younger demographic that's hidden.
Mm-hmm.
That is the LA Times, Washington Post, CBS, CNN. Even though their readership and viewers are old enough to be the grandparents of the under 30s, the influencers on these platforms are getting their news from those same sources. So as the availability of an open free press starts to close, that's where these commentators are going to get their news. If you look at the top influencers that young people are looking at, and you look at their educational background, none of them took degrees that have anything at all to do with journalism, although some of them better qualified than others. For instance, if we just take one, Ben Shapiro. He's a conservative political commentator. He got his bachelor's degree at UCLA, his JD at Harvard. He has between 15 and 20 million followers or audience reach across a number of social media platforms. Another commentator is Hassan Piker, political commentator, bachelor's degree in political science from Rutgers. Okay, fine.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, fine.
I've heard of that institution.
However, Philip DeFranco is a YouTuber that does news commentary. He attended community college, never completed a degree, and is influencing between 6 and 8 million across YouTube and other social media. Brian Taylor Cohen, who's somebody I often enjoy listening to on YouTube, has a bachelor's degree from the University of Southern California. He's got 3 to 6 million. In other words, these people never took anything that said, I'm going to be a journalist, I'm going to gather information.
These are like Rush Limbaugh wannabes.
Yeah, they're influencers, exactly
Except
right.
they're all better educated than him.
Yeah, well, the ones I've just read are, yes, they are. I'm not saying that these degrees are not important degrees, okay? I am saying that the people being influenced by these individuals are being influenced by people who don't do any kind of journalism. And that brings us to this very interesting reality about news gathering and the difference between news and being influenced about the news. So I thought I would say a word or two about a very important communication theorist named Paul Lazarsfeld, who was really interested in the elections of 1948. Mm-hmm. And after the outcome, he's a study of how people came to vote. And what he found out was that really news is a two-step system, or what he called two-step flow. What he discovered is that most people do not consume the news. And at that time, it would be primarily newspapers, although television was also important, and radio. But in every cohort group, there would be one individual who followed the news and who influenced the others in that group ultimately on how they would vote. Now, a number of contemporary communication scholars have taken two-step flow to analyze what's happening on these social platforms. Again, you have young people who are drawn to certain personalities. They're not interested in institutional authority like CBS News or NBC News or the New York Times. They're drawn to individuals that they identify with and come to trust as if they knew them. Mm-hmm. And then those individuals are shaping their understanding of the news, which they themselves have not gathered. They've gotten it from reading the New York Times or listening to broadcast news. Then the algorithms push those young people in the direction of others who are also influencers who have personalities that will be attractive to these individuals.
Now, is there a chance that these influencers are also listening to one another and just recycling the same sort of thing?
I have found, and I've just started looking into this, that the answer to that is yes, because they will interview one another on their programs.
Oh, dear.
My students had great difficulty. In fact, they were very skeptical of me for trying to draw the distinction between news gathering organization and opinion-shaping organizations like Fox. And they would criticize me for not letting any right-wing coverage in. And I said, I have a problem with commentary. But right now, we're talking about news gathering and news reporting.
Right, right.
So the inability to distinguish it is part of the problem. Algorithms are part of the problem. And then, of course, there's the amplification of the problem with the two-step flow theory, where you're not actually talking to a group of your own cohort or friends. You're talking to somebody who seems friendly on the screen.
Wow. A degradation of the process. I mean, at least in the 50s, somebody was looking at the news and sharing their views on it, and because of their personal connections had some impact on others, which in and of itself is a way of reinforcing those people believing what they wanted to believe.
But at least there'd be a discussion about it.
Yeah, but at least, and it was at least had content. I try and follow the news pretty carefully. Of course, I have to follow the economic news, but I also have to follow the business news. And the business news is often a combination of telling us what the business does and a fantasy about how the economy works at the same time. So it's like when you read something, you have to go, oh, yes, there's this neoliberal ideology underlying their collection of the news and representing it. The odd thing is the best business press separate the two. The Financial Times of London, the Wall Street Journal separates it. The Wall Street Journal does a very good job at news gathering with regard to business and things related to business. Yeah. And the opinion page is a joke.
Well, let me give you an example of creating this kind of closed system. Professor Zhang, who has a podcast under the name Predictive History on YouTube, who is Canadian Chinese, and he was exiled from China because they thought he was engaged in espionage. And then they brought him back 2 years later, which is pretty unusual. But the reason is he was fluent in English, got his degree in English at Yale, and they were trying to develop their educational system so it more resembles our ideal educational system. So he became very involved in experimental Chinese curriculum. Fine. Now he's doing regular podcasts. He does not do news gathering, but he purports to be using game theory to predict what's going to happen.
Oh, good.
And because he predicted that Trump would win the election and Trump would go to war with Iran, he's now the golden boy. So they call him in to do an interview about what's going to happen now. And he's really a kind of end-of-the-worlder. But if you listen carefully, you can't help but think China would really like him to be saying these things. Because basically he's predicting the decline of Western hegemony.
Okay, there's an interesting thing here from somebody who knows something about game theory. Game theory is demonstrative. It is performative. It is not a representation of reality. What you do is constructing a game to play with possible strategies under different conditions, right? War planning, war games are not war. Game theory is not reality, and it's not very predictive unless you happen to hit on the right circumstances. Now, the other thing is, I cannot imagine why the Chinese government would suspect a Yale graduate of being a spy, because, Yale doesn't turn out spies.
The CIA, just for our listeners' information, referred to their academic, often Yale-based recruitment pipeline as the P-source. At times, between 4 and 6 Yale graduates were estimated to enter the CIA annually. And the Yale's connection to the CIA was so strong that it was, at one point, considered a draft dodge for graduates. There's no evidence that Professor Zhang, as he calls himself, was ever involved in espionage. However, his prediction that the United States would lose the war with Iran went viral. And there was an interview with him on another YouTube platform called Breaking Points, where he was touted as someone who uses game theory to make very cogent predictions.
I mean, it's worse than you think. He purports to be using game theory, but it's not game theory. It's a mélange of information drawn from here and there. And his podcast consists very often of his giving lectures to this experimental high school in China, where everything's very open and very modernistic, and they're supposed to be inducing creative thinking. But he's talking to high school students about theories he really doesn't have any reason to purport, because he didn't know anything about it.
I think this is a wonderful development. I hope everybody in China starts using these techniques to predict the future.
But no, my point, yes, fine. But my point is, think about the algorithm effect. You've got somebody watching
yes, I get that.
A podcast who's young, 18 and 30. Seems like a pretty big spread to me, but oh well. And then the algorithm pushes them towards somebody that they interviewed, and the person they interviewed knows nothing. Okay, and in my estimation, maybe helping out in a kind of low-level propagandistic way the Chinese government. And then when they asked him at the end of this interview, well, how do you think this all will end? What do you think is really behind it? And he said, well, could be the Illuminati.
Professor Yang defines the Illuminati as consisting of 3 major groups. One is the Freemasons, the other is the Sabbateans, which is a mystical Jewish organization that in the past claimed some kind of messianic powers. And the third is the Jesuits.
That's where I was going next. Man. Okay, that's rational.
And so that was the end of that interview, and I thought, that was refreshing. Anyway,
we might do more good for the community if we just went on all these sites and wrote, well, that's horse shit. And just, over and over and over. It's like everybody makes things up, but some of us actually look at facts sometimes.
Well, I do think the difference is, no offense to any of these people who either don't have don't have a degree at all, or have a bachelor's degree but have never done any deep dives into life and how it works. at least we had to study things to get in front of these microphones with any credibility.
The other thing is, as somebody who does research, every time you come to a new question, you begin with the premise that what you think and what you have thought in the past is very likely wrong, because our information is never complete, right? You don't just keep reinforcing the same ideas.
I mean, it's a black swan effect. For centuries, Europeans thought all swans were white. And then, partly out of imperial ambition, partly out of a place to dump their prisoners, they went into Australia, and there they saw black swans. Okay, there's two ways to think about this. One is, you can always be surprised. The thing that you think is absolutely true can turn out not to be. Or the other is, and this is Bari Weiss school of thought, if you see one black swan, it discounts all the white swans. In other words, if one child is sick and also undernourished, it discounts the entire argument that Israel has created a famine in Gaza.
The interesting thing, for those of you who are historically minded, is if you take the word swan out and put in crow, this is a description of Hume's problem of induction argument, exactly as he made it in the 1700s.
Oh, do tell.
While he was teaching Adam Smith, he made exactly the same argument, only with black crows. It was a problem of induction. You look at black crows, you see black crows, so you conclude logically all crows are black. And then you see the white crow and realize the problem is it only takes one example to make you reconsider the claim.
Exactly.
Now, he didn't say that makes the opposite true, but that's the classic problem of induction, which is why in economics they preferred deduction, because they didn't want their theories turned over.
Well, do understand that. But it's also the difference between thinking in terms of universal contradictories.
Yes.
And in thinking in contradictions which can always be undermined by the word sum.
Yeah.
Sum of X or Y. So, well, this was fun.
Yeah.
We did a little logic today.
Wow.
Okay, now are we going back to youth demographics and what's going to happen with AI?
Okay. There was a wonderful bit of reporting in the New York Times where they were looking at the fact that jobs are being lost, and it's being attributed to AI, artificial intelligence. And they did a look into what sectors are likely, by virtue of what AI can do, to experience declines. And so the biggest category is technology and finance. And what they mean by that is coding and all finance except for commercial banking for working capital, investment banking for large investment projects, consumer banking, and insurance. That makes up about 5% of the national workforce. The rest of finance accounts for 25% of the U.S. workforce. Ouch. And they don't do any of those things. They're basically engaged in transferring money from one place to the other and one person to another. So that's like 25% of the population that's going to be out of work because of AI. These are people with very advanced degrees and 6- and 7-figure salaries. So this is going to have a big impact on them. Administrative and clerical roles are going to begin to disappear. My feeling is no one has ever missed an administrator. Good riddance. Now we can find these people real jobs doing meaningful work. Entry-level white-collar jobs are going to disappear, so graduating college students, go to the store and get color swatches for painting your parents' basement because you are screwed. This is the worst job market for college graduates in modern history. The most affected will be those with business degrees, coding skills, and data analysis because AI can do all those tasks faster and better. Your options are graduate school, where you can learn something real. That's your best option for the next 2 years. And don't repeat the mistake you made in choosing your undergraduate major. Focus on real productive work done in society. Customer service and support. This will be fully automated through call centers. So now a computer will be pissing you off rather than some underpaid person in a sweatshop. No one will miss these kinds of jobs because no one wanted them in the first place. But we do need to find real jobs for these people. And the same goes for the people in administrative and clerical roles. They're going to disappear. It's not their fault. Law. This is interesting because there will be far less need for associates. Associates are lawyers at the junior level, and paralegals. They handle much of the grunt work in law firms. There will be a need for more proofreading and legal research because you have to ensure that the shit AI writes isn't entirely fabricated, since judges and clerks can't verify it. However, clients are going to balk at hourly billing when they realize that their work is being done by AI rather than legal secretaries like it used to be. Firms will be engaging in AI washing, and this is the important thing that's happening right now. AI washing of the workforce is laying people off and blaming AI. Now, a lot of people hired a lot of people post-COVID.
Right.
And their workforces are really large and things are going to shit. So you don't want to lay somebody off and say they're doing a bad job, because they're not.
Yeah.
You just have to lay them off and you say, well, it's because of AI. So there's a lot of that going on. However, the firms are systematically moving away from hiring entry-level employees, right? They're keeping the highly skilled people, and then they need people to proofread, but they don't need people to do those low-level mechanical tasks. The status distinction between white-collar and blue-collar workers, already made obsolete by the rise of the service economy, will fade further. Still, workers with genuine skills in making and doing things other than shuffling paperwork for speculation, supervising others, and handling administrative crap will continue to find good opportunities. So that's the dark side of this decline in employment. Most of these people are not being let go because of AI currently. They're being let go because these firms are overstaffed in a declining economy, and they're blaming AI for that. But AI is coming. It is used in law. It is used in finance. It's increasing. And it's not very good yet, but it's going to get better.
That's right. Yeah.
So, we're seeing this happen, and you have to look and see if you're heading into a vulnerable industry. One of the problems with young people is they're choosing to pursue fields that used to be hiring.
Yeah.
They're never able to see, nor is anyone else, what the future is going to hold. And one of the things is locking yourself into a very technical degree, particularly if it doesn't involve doing anything real, structural, building buildings or farming or any plumbing, electronics, or even in the engineering in those fields. That's always going to be necessary. But sitting around in a circle and talking about how you're going to be the next tycoon is pretty useless, because all the entry-level jobs in those industries are going to be done by a machine.
I worry because undergraduates have been sold on this idea that they have to major in something that has a quote-unquote career ladder.
Literally, I talked with a college president, and he said that all of his conversations are about outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? All that the parents and students are looking for is, what job will I get? And this is a function of the way we're financing college education with student loans rather than
think
grants.
That's absolutely right. And it means that the other voices that have always said, you need a really broadly based liberal arts education that encourages not just critical thinking, but imagination. Because you don't know what you're going to be doing, but you'll find it. You'll find your passion.
More importantly, almost everybody we know has basically 4 or 5 different careers where they fundamentally change what they're doing completely. Now, they don't always leave the employment of the place they are. Most of us in higher education, when we start out, we have to focus on teaching, and then we return to our research, and then some people, sadly, take on administrative tasks. But all those things are necessary in higher education, and we shift among those different roles. And that's true in big corporations and big companies. You can move around and you're going to do very different things. But if you lock yourself into something,
Yeah.
firms no longer are willing to train or retrain their employees. So it's on you. Whenever something changes in the work environment, you're the disposable piece.
Well, I would say two things about changing jobs. My fictional mystery novel, The Lusitania Code, has been published and is readily available on all major platforms.
Wow, that's an interesting piece of news. And by the way, it is in no way a commercial endorsement, but I'm going to read it.
Well, thank you. And
You know there is regulation of this stuff, right?
And, second of all of these unemployed people could, of course, just get a microphone and earphones and start shooting bullshit and get millions of viewers or millions of listeners and monetize it.
They could do that at this wonderful environment known as the Bureaucracy Pub that has recently been written up with a full article in Forbes magazine. I just heard that from an influencer.
I want to remind you what you just said a minute ago about advertising.
What advertising? I was just telling you what an influencer said. It may not even be a real place.
Well, I think we should leave
Oh,
with one note.
No, we better talk about Ice
That's
Baby.
exactly the one
Okay.
note was
Woo!
Ice Baby.
She's
That's
more than one note, man. This segment I call Ice, and it's in reference to, the song is called Ice Baby. Well, at Ice, the nickname used internally by Ice employees for Kristi Noem, formerly the Secretary of Homeland Security, was Ice Barbie.
Yes, it was. Yes.
And she was fired by Dopey yesterday. Oops! Sorry to offend the seven dwarfs. They deserve better than that, being compared to dumpster fire. Though I might have to change that moniker for the president. Why? Because an internal source described a replacement, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, as unlikely to improve the agency that he says has become a totally lawless place under Trump. This staffer called the appointment like sending an arsonist into a burning house. So the best part of this is it removes a Republican senator from Oklahoma, but I'm sure they can find someone worse in Oklahoma to replace him. But back to Ice Barbie. Dog murderer Noem was fired not because ICE agents murdered 2 people, with one more added yesterday who was an American citizen, nor because she used government money amounting to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars on a PR campaign to promote her image, nor because she created an incompetent wannabe Gestapo whose actions insult the integrity and competence of the real Gestapo. What do you think of Kristi Noem?
I would like to say this. 2 things. One is, when John N. Kennedy, who's a junior senator from Louisiana, called her out and said that $220 million, did it have the president's approval? And she said yes. That was it. She was done.
Yeah.
But for him to do it, I mean, this is not a person you would expect that from. So this was, I think, kind of set up from the beginning, that they don't care how many people got shot in the streets. They don't care how many detention centers are or not being built. I say that because the Voldemort of all this, Miller, was very upset with Noem because she wasn't getting those detention centers built fast enough.
Actually, there was also the problem that she wasn't processing the FEMA claims. There was like a 9-month or 10-month, thousands of FEMA claims were sitting there because they all had to have her personal approval, and she didn't get around to doing it.
Well, it's because she was flying around that airplane with that beautiful bedroom.
And nice watch. Woo!
Yes.
A nice watch.
Also, Lewandowski's out, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's... There is so much scandal in this particular person's career in the last few months. And she said so many stupid things. It's amazing she lasted as long as she did.
Yeah, and so I would like to close as your media maven.
Okay.
With one observation. They've been showing one of these very expensive, high production value commercials that she ran on herself. And she's on a horse. And behind her, there's this scenery that's virtually generated of mountains and big sky and buffalo herds running. And she's saying, you know, we welcome you to America, but if you're here illegally, bad things will happen to you. That's the message. Now, she's on this horse, and I would like everybody to look at this, because the horse never moves. The scenery changes, the camera angle changes. The reason this cost what it did is that they are using a particular kind of digital, very, very expensive, very complex technology to make things look like they're moving when they're not, to make things look like you're in a setting when you're not. The best one is the buffalo herd tearing across the plains. Where is this happening right now? With her on her horse and the camera angle moving around her. Believe me, that horse had the easiest day of its life. Many people saying that this is the revenge of Cricket, the dog. They don't seem to have much sympathy for the goat, but they do for the dog.
Well, you know, man's best friend does not expect to get capped for bad behavior.
When they're 14 months old.
Oh, geez.
Well, may she be the first of a long list to go. On that note, we will see you
in 2 weeks after spring break. Bye-bye for now.